Did you know that guys walk here? Did you know guys walk here?
All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's another Sunday afternoon. It's On Deck Live. My name is D. Moss. I will be moderating today. I'm joined by my fellow panelists. We'll start from the top and let them introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hanif Nelson. I'm a musician, professor, teacher, and just very interested in today's topic.
What's up, family? I am Minnie Jones, CEO Lady Moguls, owner of jewelryfortheculture.com, and I am excited to be here today.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Robert Jones, no relation to Minnie Jones. I'm a routine contributor to this program, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about.
All right. So with that being said, my style is let's just jump right in. So today's topic, we're talking about unhealthy traditions that we pass down from generation to generation in the Black community. So they say today the word family means a lot more than it used to. It's a new world of sorts, and traditional family structures are still the norm. But non-traditional families are on the rise. However, for Black America, our families and the unity of our community is how we survived our toughest days in America. But as we look back on all the traits that we passed on, the value system, the institutions, the systems, all of that, today we're going to take a look at that and attempt to repackage what we know and then represent it and talk about the unhealthy traditions that have been passed down. So some kind of way, we're going to figure out how to vet all that information and just talk about those unhealthy traditions that we pass down, because this is indeed our family that we're talking about. So with that being said, I'm going to open up the conversation. Let's talk about it. When we talk about unhealthy traditions, values, norms that we pass down from generation to generation, what are some of the things that you think about? What comes to mind? The floor is open.
One of the first things that comes to mind is the idea of secret keeping when it comes to things that have happened that some might consider shameful, like that. And I'll say stereotypically, like, that uncle that has a problem touching little girls, or that aunt that has a problem touching little boys. And I've seen more people, in our community want to keep that secret for fear that it's going to get out there versus telling it openly to prevent another generation from falling in the same cycle, so that they don't think that stuff like that is normal. I've seen generation after generation in families where that is considered a normal thing to do.
Do you think that's something that's characteristic of the Black community, or is that something that impacts families in general across the board, regardless of ethnicity, race, religion, gender, all that stuff?
In my experience, I've seen it, and I can only go by my experience. I've seen it more in the Black community than I've seen it anywhere else.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say, Daryl, to your question, it impacts everybody. But since we're a bunch of Black folks talking about Black issues in the Black community, we're speaking on, Black families in the Black community. Places where I've lived where it's been heavily populated by white folks. Seen it a lot. But Hanif does raise a point, and even within my own family, there's those that should remain nameless. But they kind of wreak a lot of destruction in the family. And I think, as a father and an uncle and cousin and all the other stuff, it's like I keep an eye out on that. And that's one tradition I'm going to break. If I see it happen, I'm going to be on deck, literally.
All right. So why do we keep these secrets? I mean, what has been some of the explanations that we've received from family members? Some things we don't find out. We find out that the cousin is actually a sister. in a lot of cases, we have other family members that raise other people's kids. Why do we keep these secrets when we talk about, especially if we have pedophiles or whatever, rapists in the family? Why do we keep these secrets? I mean, have we ever had these conversations with family members? Has anybody discussed that? I mean, let's talk about it. I mean, what leads to folks keeping these secrets?
I mean, I think for some, it's, the idea of public shame against the family. My attitude about it is and I've talked to different people in different families about this, and I've said, look, what's worse, the idea of public shame for the family or the perpetuation of this same thing throughout generations? Because I'm the kind of person where if someone did that to my child, you're going to see me on the news.
Okay.
Because I'm not going to wait for the police to deal with it. And when we prepare, and I've heard, like I said, from the family shame to, well, we just need to handle it inside the family. We don't need everyone else to know, or, this person has been through a lot, and yes, what they did is wrong, but, we just got to deal with it and let them know. Like these are some of the things that I've heard having these conversations with people in my family and outside of my family and talking about this issue. And I think some of that comes down to, if I'm going to be blunt about it, I think some of that comes down to that plantation mindset. The idea of, well, this thing happened and we don't want to tell, or we don't want Massa to know. I think some of that is where some of that comes from, because like the idea of public shaming, I don't know anyone that wants to be embarrassed, right. But my attitude about it is I'd rather get certain things out into the open that need to be out in the open. Now, that's not to say every bit of your family business needs to be out in the open, but there's certain things like this issue, no, that needs to come out in the open so it doesn't continue to perpetuate itself.
I agree. If it's going to negatively impact someone for the long term, a little girl has her whole life completely disrupted because Uncle Junior can't keep his hands to himself. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think we're at that point where we need to have these conversations, and families need to draw a line in the sand and determine what's going to be acceptable and what isn't. I think it's pretty simple. Anything unacceptable, if you're selling drugs out of my house, listen, bro, cops are knocking on the door. I'm going to tell them exactly where you are and what you need to do, because there are certain things that are just unacceptable. Touching any of that stuff. I can't even get into it, but I agree with that. All right. Anybody want to add anything to what Hanif just asked?
I honestly think language in our education as it pertains to how we communicate, and because how we communicate and developing those skills determines if we effectively resolve conflict. We don't necessarily have any systems for resolving conflict that doesn't involve, law enforcement. If we had a system of our own where we can resolve conflicts and, call it out and heal too is big, and language is big too, because a lot of children in these situations, they don't have the language to describe what it is that's going on internally, to themselves, never mind to someone else. And I remember, my daughter being young, and she would say vagina, and everybody would laugh, and they would thought that she, referred to herself that way. And I'm like, well, what do you want her to call it? You know what I mean? We don't necessarily teach our kids these proper terms. We don't necessarily know proper terms. And a lot of times we communicate from a place of emotion rather than understanding or reasoning. So we don't know how to talk to each other. And if you don't know how to talk to each other, you're not going to be able to resolve conflict. And also, I would be okay if we didn't necessarily call the police on pedophiles, stuff like that, but we just let them live. And that is not okay at all. It's my 2 cents on that.
You said we just let them live. That is not okay.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily, promoting, murder or anything, but we got to do something. Whether, I don't know. I don't know, facilities, you know, broken limb, whatever. We have to deal with it though. And we have to have, I think it's important to have a recourse outside of the legal system because they don't deal with pedophiles the same way they deal with drug dealers. Anyway.
Agreed.
So yeah, we gotta handle it. It needs to be handled. We have to have a system to handle these things.
But you know, kind of branching off of what Minnie was saying, I think one of the things that is a bad habit is if you're dealing with kids who are unruly, you know, you threaten to drop them off at the police station. I see that in that community. I mean, hell, my mom drove me all the way to Walpole. Said, this is where you're going. When I was a kid, and there's people in my family that have made comments, I'm dropping so-and-so off to the jail, or I'm dropping them off at the police station. I don't know if any of you all had to deal with that, but you know, I look at that as a bad habit in some of our households.
Well, no, I didn't have to deal with that because my mom was a cop. So like you know, and then what made it worse was when my dad would come see me for the weekend. I remember one time I thought I was slick. I thought I was going to steal something from the supermarket with my mom and got caught. And I didn't get the ass whooping from her. It came from my dad for the weekend, and I couldn't say to him, "I'm gonna call the cops on you," because he was a cop too. So man. I couldn't say I didn't have that because the police station was my house. You know, but what I want to say, kind of to what Minnie was saying, also is that there are some families that out there. Like I've been to certain parts of this country where in the Black community there are certain traditions and things that they do outside of the law to handle certain issues. But the common thread that I've always seen when it comes to this particular issue is that I've very rarely seen where it's like, let's call this out in the open for what it is and let's deal with it. Because there's also the stigma that is in not all Black people, because we're not all a monolith. There's also the stigma of what do you do after it's discovered? The stigma of, well, therapy is not for us. Psychologists, we don't need counseling. We don't need any of that. But yeah, you do. If you've gone through something like that, the person who had the trauma inflicted on them, they most definitely need it. The people who are going to be supporting that child, if this happened to a child, they most definitely need it. And it's in some of the remedies that we're talking about that the language Minnie is saying that, that some of us don't have, that we can learn what that language is. But that being said, I think whether we deal with it with the law or outside of the law, it needs to be dealt with and not swept under the rug. I've talked to too many people in my lifetime that have told me that this happened to them and nothing happened to the person that did it. It was reported to the family and no one did anything. And then that person grows up with all kinds of scars and insecurities and thoughts about themselves that's not even real because they're dealing with unresolved trauma. At least this secret keeping, whether it's about molestation or whether it's about a lot of things, it produces so much unresolved trauma. And anytime you have trauma that is unresolved, it will manifest itself some way, somehow. Your body will not allow it to go unchecked because it needs to be resolved in order for the body to function properly.
Okay, absolutely, I agree.
So Hanif, based on what you're saying, do you think that whole snitch, that the whole snitch phenomenon that's kind of not just endemic in our community, but is out there, kind of like exacerbates that?
Yeah, to an extent. I would definitely say that to an extent that it does, but I think like people need to qualify. Well, no, I won't say that. I think when it comes to the whole idea of snitching, it's like, if you do something to a child and I find out about it, you can call me whatever you want, but you better hope that whatever you call me is on the day when I'm not ready to put my hands on you. But I'm gonna do what's necessary for that child before I worry about you calling me a snitch. I don't care. You call me whatever you want. But yeah, I think for some people that is an issue. I know Minnie had her hand up.
The no snitching thing. I just want to make clear for everybody because there used to be a code in the streets, and there's just no code. No snitching code. It's for it doesn't apply to civilians. Let's just be clear about that. If you out in these streets and you thugging and bugging, you're let me try to fix my volume. And you're selling drugs, whatever the case may be, that's a code between for people who live that lifestyle. But if you're a civilian, like that, there's no snitching code when it comes to civilian. If I'm not in that life, I'm not in that life. And if I'm harmed or if I know somebody in danger themselves or whatever, it's not the same. So I just want to be clear about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think D, you and I have talked on the radio show. We said we're snitches, because I'll be lying. I'm a snitch. If you're doing something bad around me, I'm telling. Because at the end of the day, who are you protecting? Because that person who you're protecting continues to terrorize the neighborhood, and then eventually they're going to loop back around to you, and then you're going to be like, well, how come no one told somebody? Well, you knew.
Okay. But does that speak to us attempting to protect thugs, hoodlums, drug dealers, whatever the case may be, or does it have more to do with our relationship to policing industry, the policing industry, law enforcement, knowing that I call the police on Hanif, there's a good chance that he may get beat down. There's no telling what would happen once that phone call is made. There's been a number of situations where family members have called the police on other family members for different situations and ended up with their loved ones either in the hospital or deceased. So I think we have to keep that in mind too. There's a reason why we don't call the police.
Yeah.
I guess we could talk about that as well. I think when we talk about negative traditions or negative value sets that are passed down from generation to generation, does snitching fall into that category, or is that a byproduct of our relationship with law enforcement?
I think it's 6 in one hand and half a dozen in the other. I think they're both inextricably linked.
Okay, I mean, It doesn't justify the allowing the drug dealer to sell sell drugs off Miss Johnson's steps, knowing that she's 75 years old. But it's kind of like at some point we need to make a decision, but we can't do that until we resolve the issue of law enforcement by either changing the present system or putting a system in place, as Hanif had alluded to, a system in place to ensure that we secure and defend our own communities. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that right there and what you just said is the issue. If we're going to say, nah, man, we can't snitch, we can't snitch if someone did this, we can't snitch if someone did that, we can't snitch on our own because of what law enforcement is going to do, then you who's willing to say that, you better be the same person that's willing to patrol your neighborhood to keep that from happening. And so it's like, to quote the great John Legend, we ordinary people out here. So like, if we're going to sit there and say no snitching, then let's make sure that we're actually out here patrolling our neighborhoods and doing the work we don't trust law enforcement to do. If we're not willing to do that, then all we're allowing these same things to continue to perpetuate in our community over and over again, and then complaining when the solution is in our own place.
And you know what? With what Hanif said about the complaining, which I think is another bad habit in our community, we're constantly being told, just pray on it. Pray to Jesus. Jesus will fix it. If you give Jesus in your heart, you'll be all set. And, no, because Jesus ain't hitting that high blood pressure because you're eating all that fried chicken. Jesus ain't helping out if you're dealing with some family members who are doing some things. Religion ain't gonna pull us out of the hole. But that's one thing, family members, especially the older family members, are always touting. Not just the older ones, just in general, touting. Oh, you gotta, pray on it, read the Bible, bring Jesus into your heart.
So Rob, let me ask you a question. Are you saying this is how we resolve our issues, or is that one of those value sets one of those unhealthy value sets that we pass down from generation to generation, we have the person in the family who's been touching all the nieces, nephews, and granddaughters, and we say we pray on it.
Yeah.
We have crime in our neighborhood. You're saying, well, if that boy had only gone to church, he'd be fine. So let's talk about that whole aspect as it pertains to religion.
I mean,
Yeah, I think it's definitely an unhealthy habit, but I didn't mean to interrupt. Minnie, you get something to say?
Yeah, I think it goes back to not having the language, not having the answers. You know what I mean? Like when somebody in the black community say, "I'll pray for you," that was the prayer, and that's it, not anything, nothing tangible. And I think that when I started questioning why we do the things that we do and really seeking those answers, I think we need to make a habit of that. We have a habit of going along to get along, but why do we do shit? Nobody says like, why do we do this? Why do we celebrate this? And then I ask myself that, and then I go and find the answers, or I might check my assumptions, like, oh, it's because it's the Christian thing to do, and then you look into the Christian thing to do as it pertains to Christmas, and it's not the Christian thing to do. People don't know why they do it; they just do it. Why do we eat chicken? If you look into that, you'll understand that's not something that we should do. Even like I don't even understand when people say bless you when you sneeze. Like why? It makes no sense to the point where people will get offended if you don't say bless you when you sneeze. And they're like, oh, because your heart skips a beat. It skips a beat when you fart too. So what? Like why do we do that? And even when it comes to gang life, why do we join gangs? And you understand the origin of why we started gangs, and then you have a deeper understanding of who you are and how you can move in such a way that better benefits the community.
So let me ask you a question. Does that fall back to the communication skill sets? We have language, body language. There's so many different types of ways that we communicate with one another. One is reasoning. If my great grandfather says everybody's gonna bang themselves in the head with a hammer every morning, if every generation from that period on bangs themselves on the head with a hammer, when do we stop and ask the question? And when our baby daughter or our baby son says, "Why am I doing that?" We say, "Boy, shut up and do what I say." Does that fall back on our logic or our capacity to reason? You know, what causes that? And I think that's what we need to get to. Like, as we talk about some of these things that we pass down from generation to generation, let's talk about the rationale behind it. So why do you think that occurs?
So why do I think that we don't question anything? Honestly, I think that it goes down to the breaking up of the black family. I know that black mothers get a lot of crap, but it boils down to having to, for whatever reason, whether you're incarcerated or whatever, having a single parent household, kids become what I call occupational orphans. You know what I mean? Like the first 3 years of your life is really vital. It teaches you to want to learn and how we respond to babies. We are not we're raising laborers. You know what I mean? Not owners or free thinkers or bosses, not even wives, husbands, fathers, and mothers. We're not raising these individuals on purpose. We come from occupational orphan homes where parents work doubles. They don't have time to necessarily help you with your homework. Make sure it's done, even know where you are all the time. A lot of us was latchkey kids, and when you don't have solid foundations, it's hard for you to understand things like how to comprehend and how to nonviolent communication. Like there's a formula for communicating. Well, a lot of us are ruled by our feelings and our assumptions, and that's where we operate from. And we don't necessarily operate from a place of collectivism. You know what I mean? Like if we don't have a system where we, like when we was going back to snitching and gang bangers and stuff like that. Like I remember, right before Pop died, he had did this interview where he was on the phone with somebody, and it just made a lot of sense. If we have a code, an agenda, and a system, you know what I'm saying, we can build these things, and you won't have all these issues going around. Like these dudes out here causing all the trouble, they just need money. They need money. They need purpose. You know what I'm saying? Those are things that we don't necessarily offer our youth either. Now, if I was to go to them and say, listen, y'all bugging, broad daylight. Why don't y'all just relax? How about y'all just do what y'all do? Y'all can have the night. Y'all can have the night. Do what y'all do. You know what I'm saying? We have a system for conflict resolution, so it don't always have to boil down to fighting or shooting. You know what I'm saying? Y'all have the night within reason. But in the morning, y'all make sure these kids get to their bus stops. Okay? Y'all make sure they ain't getting taken away from legs. Make sure, you know, husbands ain't beating on their other way around too. Husbands beat wives, wives beat husbands, stuff like that. Where we have a system where we can police ourselves, and then we'll have the room to grow. But we have to raise bosses. We have to raise royalty on purpose. We don't have, like I've been saying a lot lately, where we need a rites of passage system where, you know, kids, children, students, or whatever, they understand how to cook. They know how to change a tire. They understand the importance of credit and taxes. They understand how to communicate with other people, especially their spouses and their children. Things like that. If we can instill these values for ourselves, by ourselves, defined by us, executed and implemented by us, then you'll see almost instantly, you know what I mean, as the generations go, how much better off we'll be if we have that code, that system, that agenda.
You know, there's something else I wanted to say that a little bit related to what Minnie just said, but also that's speaking to, you know, your original question about, you know, religion. I think one of the things, whether it's religion or not, that causes these problems to happen is people hear stuff, and because of the source that they're hearing it from, they hear it and they don't question it. Like, I believe that I need to pray about certain things, but I also know that the Bible says that faith without works is dead, being alone, that there are certain things that you show your faith by the work that you're actually doing. It doesn't mean that every single situation is for you to sit down and pray and wait. There are certain situations, no, you need to do something, period. And you can pray while you're doing and get course correction if you're going in the wrong direction. But I can't tell you how many times I've gone to church and listened to sermons and listened to people saying amen. I'm like, did you actually hear what they said? Like, did you actually read how the scripture that they're, and I kid you not, I will not name the church, right, but I was teaching in a church once a long time ago. And just to test this theory, I was saying, you know, sometimes we get so caught up in emotion that we don't listen to what's being said. And so I was getting everyone riled up, and I was talking about, well, right now we're going to take this offering, you know, and we're going to do this thing because Jesus wants to make sure that my car payment is paid. And I had everyone riled up, and everyone's saying amen, and everyone's riled up. And then I sat there and I said, did you hear what I just said? I told you that Jesus wants you to pay my car note. I don't even have a car note. At the time, I didn't have one. I'm like, my point is that we get so caught up, whether it's religion or not, because I think because it's a big target, but this goes beyond religion. We get caught up in our traditions and don't root out what traditions are healthy and which ones are unhealthy. We don't question the origin of the tradition. We don't question whether that tradition is even valid, whether that tradition is something that was being done to preserve and protect the family, or whether it was something that was being done just because. We don't grow our knowledge in certain areas. So when you don't have knowledge in an area, you're very susceptible to being deceived in that area. It's like if I come over to you and I say, you know what, you know, do you want to invest money in the stock market? I'm this financial planner, you know, and I give you all these terms that make it sound like I know what I'm talking about. I could know what I'm talking about, but I could be ripping you off just as easily because you don't know what I'm talking about. So whether we look at it from a religious lens or whether we look at it from the lens of things that we've done, like the do what I say, not what I do philosophy. I don't know if anyone else has had that in their family, but I'm like, you know, you can't sit there and say, do what I say, you know, when you're not doing what you say. You know, it becomes, you start losing credibility, especially with, you know, the younger generation right now. If you telling them do this and they see you're not doing that, well, why should I listen to you when you don't do it? So like religion and family traditions both fall in my mind, they both fall in that category of people accepting something without even knowing what it is, without researching, reading, and discovering for themselves, and then deciding for themselves whether what they've been told based on the facts that are available to them is even the truth. So, I mean, I think we need to look at that end when we start talking about this too.
But Hanif, doesn't that fall back on what Minnie alluded to when she talked about communication skills? Typically, when we think communication, we think about how we communicate with one another. Another aspect of communication skills is just teaching logic, or teaching our young people reasoning skills. And I
don't agree with that. And the reason why I don't agree with that, is because teaching people communication skills I can teach you how to be the best communicator in the world. That doesn't mean you know how to research anything.
Well, no, then you didn't hear what I said.
Mm-hmm.
What I said was another tenet of communication is reasoning skills. I didn't say it was, it's not about how we communicate or how articulate you are, what vernacular you use. I'm talking about reasoning skills, critical thinking. How do we teach kids, how do we talk to young people instead of saying, shut up, sit down? Why don't we ask the question, well, what are you doing? And just simple, open-ended questions to get them to engage you in conversation, to get them to think critically about what they're doing. If a child doesn't know how to ask the question, well, why am I doing this? What's going to happen when that child reaches 19, 20, 21, 22? It's not just going to show up one day because they're sitting in a church service or because they're sitting in someone's classroom. I think, reasoning skills, I think it's a little bit different. So how do we get our folks to the point? It's easy to say people should ask questions or think critically when they hear someone, just spitting out the dogma. But how do you vet all that? How do you kind of read between the distortion and say, okay, that makes absolutely no sense. I'm not going to do that. And I think that's where we're at. I think that's where we're at.
But even when you say that, like reasoning based off of what? I'll give you a great example. All right, I watched a video on YouTube where this person was talking about transgenderism. He was talking about how, one of the impetus behind transgenderism is that, a person believes in their heart that they are something other than what they were naturally born. And if you say that their reasoning is wrong, you're hateful and you're bigoted. And then the person argued, well, then if that is acceptable reasoning for transgenderism, then why are we labeling people that say Trump won the election and there was election fraud as hateful and bigots, even though there's information that says, no, he didn't? The comparison he was making was that if the reasoning isn't based off of something objective that we can all agree is objective, then your reasoning at best is always going to be subjective to what you naturally lean to and what your logic naturally agrees to or believes is the case. Now, I bring that point up because on this panel, we have people that believe various different things when it comes to religion and spirituality. We can talk about these conversations on this panel because the one common ground that we have is that there's a respect for one another, whether we agree with what's being said or not. But if you put someone else in the mix that doesn't have that common ground with us, their reasoning will be to shut everyone down who's not listening to them. You get what I'm trying to say?
No, I hear you.
So it's not that I disagree with what you're saying about reasoning, because I do believe it's important. But I also think it's like, well, what's the basis of our reasoning? Because if we don't have a common ground on the basis of our reasoning, then it becomes a subjective argument nonetheless.
But what you talked about earlier,
one of the things that I had,
I'll be quiet. Go ahead, Minnie. No.
One of the things that I wanted to bring up is the fact that we won't take responsibility for educating our children. Our children don't go to school for education; they go to school for indoctrination. They are not concerned with teaching our children how to think. They're more concerned with teaching them what to think. So, I'll never forget one of my proudest moments as a parent. As I'm walking, me and my daughter's riding home from school. She's like, "Man, I think that's flat, Mom. It's flat. It looks flat to me." And then I'm not gonna necessarily discourage her from thinking that, but I'm gonna tell her how to get down to educator perspective, because I'm like, baby girl, there's a lot of what most people were geniuses out there that will agree with you, but look into that. I like the fact that she valued what she sees. Children are very concrete in their thinking. Well, that abstractness, that elasticity of the brain doesn't come until the foundation is solid. So I don't necessarily want to control what she thinks. I want to teach her how to think. One of the most important things I learned as a student was what constitutes a fact. You got to understand that fact and truth are not always the same. You have to, and if we're going to engage in something, if we're going to engage in a discussion or whatever, we have to learn the scientific method. We don't teach our children the scientific method. You have a thought or a hypothesis, an assumption. And what you do is you're going to look at both sides of that argument to both validate your own and to discredit the opposition. But you're going to have to look at both sides of the story. That's another thing that we don't do when it comes to religion or something like that. We're like, oh, I don't want to research. I don't want to question. That's not what the Bible teaches you either. So we have to understand that. Then we test those theories, okay, until we can gather up enough data so that we have facts to verify our hypothesis. And once you can get down to that process, and whether, no matter what it is that you think, no matter what it is that you do, if you take the scientific approach to all things, then you can predict outcomes. And then you can manipulate outcomes. And that on a metaphysical level, on a biological level, on a political level, that is alchemy. Okay? That's taking, controlling the inputs, or taking the inputs, controlling them, varying them, and then getting a desired outcome. And that's what we don't do. We don't necessarily, before we engage, what is a fact? Is it something that you can find in 3 or more primary resources? You understand what I'm saying? Like, anybody can pull up an article, especially nowadays, and get it to say anything. But do you understand how to analyze data? Until we take a scientific approach to all things like we used to, this is our approach. This is our natural way of life. This is our natural way of being. But because those certain type of geniuses aren't exploited when we're children, we don't get to that point. Then we send our kids off to be indoctrinated, whether they're going to church on Sunday, Bible study on Friday, and school every day of the week. You know, that's a whole bunch of indoctrination. That's all of it. That's not education. You need to get down to the nitty-gritty of education. Once you know how to think, or know how to move.
But Minnie, wouldn't you say that's all by design? Because, you know, when you look at Black families, we sit around our tables, and, you know, our mothers and fathers, grandparents, and if we're lucky, great grandparents. What do they espouse? You know, go to school, get a good education so you can get a good job. No one, you know, we're not really talking about on a consistent basis, go to school, get a good education to own your own business. I mean, years ago when I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, when Robert Kiyosaki was talking about his dad being the poor dad and his dad's best friend being the rich dad, both of them elevated education to a high degree, but one was like, get a good job versus, and the other one was like, you know, start your own business. So one of the things that I do is when I'm driving around with my son or my nephew or whatever, whomever kids I'm mentoring, we see vans driving by, trucks and businesses. I'm like, hey, you know what? You can own that business one day. You can own a business. You can create a business. And I remember talking to some of the young ones, and they were like, yeah, I want to be Kobe. I want to be Shaq, you know, because they're rich. And I'm like, well, you know, they're employees. What? I said, Dr. Jerry Buss, he writes that check to Kobe and Shaq. He owns the Lakers. So do you want to be them, or you want to be Dr. Jerry Buss? And it was just, they weren't thinking along those terms. And I remember coming up, you know, get a good education to get a good job. So when you talk about those critical thinking skills, that's not the design of the structure.
So at what point does it become the design that we create for our families? See, here's the deal. I heard everything Minnie said, and I agree 100%. Rob, I dig what you're saying, but I'm a little confused. Are you saying that we shouldn't use deductive reasoning. We shouldn't.
Oh no, I'm saying that we absolutely should. We should be teaching them.
Forget the colonizers' design. What should we be doing? As we talk about these I can't even get it out. As we talk about these transitional values, these negative transitional values, how do we change that? How do we alter that? Do we constantly defer to a colonizer's design, or do we start to look at things differently, teach differently, speak differently, so that our folks can begin to look at these things critically? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, maybe then the conversation should definitely shift from, you know, discussing bad habits in Black households to, you know, how do we address these habits? Because you're absolutely right. We got to change the paradigm. We definitely got to change the paradigm, and some of us are doing it. You know, I'd like to see on a broader spectrum, but a lot of us are doing it already.
I agree, and I think we can stick to topic. But I think my thing is this: as we bring up an area, if we say religion, then let's provide some background as opposed to saying religion, giving 4 examples, and then move on. So we could talk about it all day, but I just think we should give an example of a negative transitional value, but then let's give some background and let's talk about how that happened so that we can overcome it and move forward. Does that make sense? So like the next one I was going to bring up is just our food culture is horrible. So it would be, let's talk about the background of food culture. If we're talking about, you know, we talked about family secrets. There's so many elements to family secrets, from people having 2 and 3 families to domestic violence to sexual aggression. Let's talk about what causes that. Let's talk about how we can get people to move forward. We don't have to give like definitive responses, but at least give our listeners an opportunity to know where they need to start from to move on from here. Does that make sense? All right. So this is where we are for folks who have just tuned in. This is On Deck Live. I'm on with Minnie Jones, Hanif Nelson, Rob Jones. My name is D Moss. I'm going to go to the sidelines real quick. Maddie Kingori says it's definitely a shame because when you are young, we talked about family secrets. When you are young, when it happens as an adult, realization of what happened to you or a family member can cause a heavy burden. Absolutely. She also says that burden affects future decisions on actions and standings. She goes on to say, as we talked about religion, God is going to give you the strength to knock someone out that harm yours. Seek faith always, but God gives you free will to do what is right. Old family secrets keeping does much harm and needs to stop. Many said blind faith. I'm also saying knowing what the hell you're talking about. Emma Genesee asked the question, is that Black culture though, or American culture? Which is similar to what I asked in the beginning. So it's kind of like, where do we draw the line for Black families, and then where does it just impact everybody across the board? Because we are specifically talking about Black families. Are these American issues, period, or are these strictly Black family issues?
Definitely not just American issues, because I mean, this kind of stuff happens in countries around the world. That there hasn't been one country that I've visited in my lifetime where this issue, when we were talking about family secret keeping, has not been present. And while I haven't been to a ton of countries, I've been to more than 5, and every single country I've been to, this is an issue everywhere. So I can't say it's just Black or that it's just American.
I agree. I know my experience, my background working with both kids mandated to the Department of Youth Services and also kids charged to the custody of the Department of Children and Families. We worked with kids of all backgrounds, and everybody was dealing with issues of, family sexual aggression from family members, all types of issues. So it's not just a Black issue, but I think when we talk about it, to get to Emma's point, as we look at it in terms of how it impacts our families and how we how we're able to point out some of these negative traits and what we can do to actually put a formula in place so that we can overcome them and move forward, I think it's a little different. So go ahead, Rob. I hear you mumbling. Speak out loud. Rob Jones, are you on the phone? All right. Anything else you want to add, Minnie? Transitional values that we pass down from generation to generation.
We need to seek mental health. We don't see therapists, and I think a big part of that is that a lot of the only access that we have to therapists are through public systems, and it's hard to trust public systems. So if we can get, more melanated therapists out there that we can see that are not necessarily from the public sector, but maybe take mass health. That would be cool. Another thing that we do, a lack of inheritance. For hundreds and hundreds of years, we've been denied heritage, denied our inheritance. And that's an easy fix. That's an easy fix. Everybody just go get life insurance. Everybody get $250,000 with life insurance. I promise things will change for us if everybody get, I don't care if it's term, whole, if you got to work your way up, but the simplest, easiest way to, fix that problem of never inheriting. We're living to die, just to die, when you can pay, a certain, a very small amount, insignificant amount, probably less than your cable bill, to keep it $1, way less than your cable bill, and you can get insured, and we can start leaving behind wealth. That's an easy thing to do, and we don't take charge of our children's education. So really, I would ask myself, what does my child need to know in order to be, successful in life when I'm gone, in my absence.
Right.
Whatever those things are, make yourself responsible, making sure your child knows those things until we can have a system of education that could facilitate that process. But until then, within your own home, take charge of educating your children. Make sure it's practical stuff, okay? Practical things. Like, you don't necessarily need to get into advanced calculus if you don't want to go that route. A lot of times, if we can keep education interest-based and only teach that which they need and that which they are interested in, that's how you got 14-year-old graduate masters and with a doctor, things of that nature. A family that took charge of their education. And lastly, I'll question everything you think you know. Don't just ask yourself, like, how do I know that? What do you know? How do you know it? Is that something that you actually came up with on your own? Were you influenced to think that way? And challenge what you know. Challenge everything, whether or not you're going to verify that is a fact, that you believe that's a fact. That's fine. Or, you know what? I don't think like that no more. Now I know better. Either way, go through that process, because we can't keep passing down false truths, because we do a lot of that. Just going along to get along. Just challenge everything, and that's it.
All right, thank you, Minnie. Hanif, your closing thoughts. Let's wrap this.
I think that the biggest thing when it comes down to some of these negative traditions is that the empowerment of how we break these traditions is, one, a willingness to say, no, this stops with me. And two, when you have that willingness, a willingness to gain knowledge, the appropriate knowledge for the situation. You cannot overcome something that, one, you won't admit is there, two, you won't try to find out any information about, and three, that you won't take that information to do something about. So when it comes down to these issues, and I think the one we haven't hit, but is a topic for a future show when we're talking about food, a lot of this is like what you don't know. And one of the most important things I think Minnie just said when it comes to our children is being in charge of our children's education. And I know, Dee, I told you this before, but I've never told Minnie that at a meeting when my son was in kindergarten, I had a lady telling me that I was doing my son a disservice because he was educated in a certain area far higher than he would be, than he's supposed to be. And because of all the things that he needed to get done, that I should just leave the education to her. And I told her, no, I'm in charge of his education. You're a partner. I decide what's right and what's not right. And a lot of us don't realize that because we're doing we're just trying to get along. We're just trying to survive. And some of us feel like we don't have the capability to really take charge. And we all do. It's just we all have to grow in our knowledge base so that we're not just fighting to survive, that we learn how to thrive. And I think that's another one of these things that we should talk about in the future. The idea of one of the family traditions that I've seen is also, you got to do what you got to do to survive. Screw that. Survival is overrated. I want to thrive. And I'll leave it with that.
Hold up. I'm just trying to type as you guys draw points. There we go. There's a lot of good things. We didn't get to everything, but as you can see, it's It's one of those complex conversations. On the surface, it looks really easy as we talk about those negative transitional values. We have much to talk about in our communities. And I mean, there's just so many areas that we need to discuss and we really need to delve into. I agree. I think taking control of your household is probably first and foremost. What you do in your household will help shape the destinies of everyone in your household. When you look at your peer circles, no matter how old or young you are, you can help your friends begin to change slowly as well. Everybody's not just going to stop living their old lives overnight. It's going to require patience, meeting people where they are, requires some understanding, and some strategic planning around how to get them to do things differently. Today, we talked about family secrets, whether it's sexual aggression, domestic violence, second families, whatever the case may be. Family secrets. If you know there are some horrible family secrets out there, listen, man, it's time to bring the family together and everybody sit down and get some of that stuff resolved. For the folks who need help, many alluded to the mental health crisis within our community. It's time to start accessing our mental health professionals and getting people the treatment that they need. You can pray all day, but if you don't get up and do something afterwards, then you're just, you're part of the problem. We talked about communication and language and all that stuff, things that we need to learn about, things we need to be teaching our children, how we talk to them, how we address them, how we raise the level of expectations for them and setting perimeters for them. We need to do that. We didn't get the corporal punishment in terms of that negative trait that we passed down in terms of grabbing a belt, a broom, an extension cord or whatever and just beating the black off of our kids. That's one of those things that have to stop. I found when my son was young, it was far more effective to give him an hour-long lecture and get on my soapbox and preach all day long than it was to pull out a belt and beat him. We talked a little bit about food culture, but I think at some point we need to come back and talk about food culture. We need to look at single-parent households and ask ourselves why we have so many single-parent households. But at the same time, we need to do some capacity mapping and look at our dual-family households. And I think we need to begin to speak on those as much as we do the single parent households. Everything in our community isn't a deficit. And we need to really speak more about the capacities of our communities. We don't do that enough. We have to stop just simply doing horrible things because our ancestors, our grandparents and great-great-grandparents did something. So what? Grandma had an incredible recipe. If it's unhealthy, damn it, it's unhealthy. We need to teach our family members and friends the difference between an argument and a debate. And Hanif, I'm gonna have you lead the conversation on that one. The difference between an argument and a debate. Just because you argue all the time does not mean that you should have went off and gotten a career as an attorney. So we'll talk about that. Mental health, critical. Over the next couple of weeks, we had Gary Porter on about a week ago. And I'm hoping to get him and some of his colleagues from his clinic to come on and let's talk about, the mental health crises in the Black community. Many talked about denied inheritance. Listen, legacy planning is everything. If you're not legacy planning, then I tell you, you're continuing a trend that should have died 50 years ago. Hanif talked about survival living. Actually, I think I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. We have to stop survival living. Survival living is horrible. Once you get to the point where you decide to move way beyond simply surviving and start living and planning to live comfortable and, really creating a plan to reach a certain quality of life, I think we'll get there. But at this point, you look at all the tenets that we discussed previously. I mean, it all falls right along the lines of survival living. And we have to stop being survivalists and really learn how to live. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, this is On Deck Live. We are here every Sunday at 3 p.m. If you have a suggestion for a topic, if you're a professional in some field, some aspect or in some capacity, or if you feel you just have something that you would like to contribute to one of our conversations, you can inbox me. My name is Daryl Moss, or better yet, you can go to the On Deck TV page and send us an inbox message. Tell us what you want to talk about. Tell us about how you like to contribute. And one of the people on the panel will get back to you. And with that being said, Hanif, Minnie, Rob Jones is on with us earlier. Thank you so much. Until next time, we'll be back, y'all. This is On Deck Live. Peace. All right.